The clock is ticking down to November's US presidential election, and one country with a lot at stake is Ukraine. As we've covered extensively in tonight's program, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been on a charm offensive in America, meeting with both presidential nominees Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. So what was he trying to achieve, and did he achieve it? Joining me now is Alberto Coll, Professor at DePaul University College of Law. Good evening.
Good evening.
Well, we finally got that Zelenskyy-Trump meeting, but did either of them really want to sit down with the other?
Well, Zelenskyy is a very smart politician. He knows he needed to sit down with Donald Trump, and so he did that. What he privately thinks of Donald Trump, that's anybody's guess. And Trump is not particularly fond of Zelenskyy either, but Trump understands that, Ukraine is important. So in spite of Trump's rhetoric about Ukraine in the past, Trump knows that if he wins the election, he will have to deal with the problem of Ukraine. And I think Zelenskyy played his cards well. I think Zelenskyy made a couple of missteps during this trip. Number one, he fell into the media's trap of giving some opinions about what he thinks of J.D. Vance. And he should not have done that. He should keep to himself whatever he thinks of the Republican candidate for vice president. And secondly, that trip that Zelenskyy took to the ammunitions factory in Pennsylvania with only Democrats was not a wise move. He basically got entangled into the presidential campaign. And once Zelenskyy knew that there were not going to be any Republicans along on that trip, he should have just called off the trip to the factory. Other than that, Zelenskyy is doing his best. He's trying to reach to both parties, and that's smart of him to do.
So did Zelenskyy achieve what he set out to do on this trip?
Look, you cannot measure these trips just by one result. Zelenskyy has an uphill battle to climb because he keeps coming back asking for more support, which Ukraine desperately needs. And even President Biden, even if Kamala Harris were to win in November, she's going to need Republican support for more aid to Ukraine. And within the Republican Party, there are those who believe that the Europeans should step up to the plate some more. So the conversation has to be really turned back to Europe. The European economy, the European Union has a GDP 7 times larger than that of Russia. And that's not including the United Kingdom, which if we add that, they're a military ally, would mean an economy 8 or 9 times larger than that of Russia. So Europe needs to be providing significantly more aid than it is. And that means the European leaders have to be straight with their publics and say, hey, we need to rearm. We need to start spending more money seriously, not just on defense, but on upgrading our industrial base. And that will be very helpful also in getting those U.S. skeptics of more aid to Ukraine on board. So this is a big job. Zelenskyy is not going to get that done in just a month, but he's going to keep coming back to the States. And his idea is to keep Ukraine on the agenda to remind Americans, as he does very effectively, that Ukraine matters to the United States security. It's not just a matter of morality for the United States. More than morality, it's a matter of our own national security is at stake in whatever happens ultimately to Ukraine.
Of course, Europe needs to do its part, and there are many here that will say Europe needs to do more, but it does rely on those security guarantees from the US. How critical is this election for Ukraine and its prospects in its fight against Russia?
Well, so I think either candidate, whoever wins, is going to have questions having to do with strategy. I mean, for example, imagine for a moment that Kamala Harris wins the election, True, so far the Biden-Harris administration has been willing to support Ukraine, but again, the question is now, what kind of strategy do we have over the long term to ensure Ukrainian victory? And part of the problem with the Biden-Harris administration is that it has been giving Ukraine weapons, but a little too late and not enough of them. And so what we know is that there's going to have to be some kind of a political settlement. We're going to have to persuade Russia at some point that we mean to stay in this for the long run. And to do that, we need that political will. So imagine a scenario in which Trump wins. He said that, oh, he's going to solve the Ukraine war in 24 hours. Of course, this is hyperbole. He's always using hyperbole. But I do think that Trump will push Ukraine to sit down. But also, of course, Russia has to be willing to sit down. So far, we don't have any evidence that Russia is willing to sit down. And also the question for Ukraine will be, okay, what kind of a peace deal are they prepared to accept? It's one thing to give up some territory to the Russians, let's say territory that they're already holding, but Ukraine is going to insist that for it to do that, it will need some very serious security guarantees from the United States and Europe, so that in the future, Russia does not repeat what it did on February 2022. These are incredibly complicated questions. It's easy to say, well, it's better off the Democrats win the election. Ukraine will be better off, but that's not altogether clear. The Democrats are still going to need Republican support. And at the end of the day, that support requires that Europe step up more and that, again, we develop a strategy. If we're going to keep helping Ukraine, we have to also give it weapons that are sufficient at least to convince Russia that we are in it for the long haul, that this is not something that we're going to get tired of.
You mentioned there Kamala Harris and the scenario where she's voted in. I mean, as much as Trump has been criticised for his inflammatory rhetoric around the war, is Kamala Harris the one that will be able to end it?
We don't know. I mean, we don't know. Trump could as easily be the one that ends it because, there's a scenario in which, Trump is going to come in as president, but he's also going to wind up surrounding himself with advisors. The people who actually carry out policy in this country are often policy professionals. And in the Republican Party, that means some very hawkish national security professionals who do not want to give Russia an easy victory. And so Trump may come in, do his grand diplomatic gesture. He's big at that. He tried that with North Korea. It didn't quite work the way he thought it would. But he's going to try the grand gesture. And then the people around him are going to say, okay, boss, you cannot let Putin win this one. You don't want to be known, boss, as the man who gave the whole of Ukraine to Putin. I think this will play to Trump's ego, to his own interest in a historical legacy. And at the end of the day, Trump may figure out that, after trying, that Putin, the only way to get Putin to the table is to give Ukraine the really tough weapons that the Biden team has been unwilling to give to it. And then after a while, there may be a negotiation, and you may see a settlement of sorts. But again, it would have to be coupled with promises that the United States and NATO and our European allies will be prepared to step up to Ukraine's aid with ironclad guarantees.
Kamala Harris says if Ukraine gives up territory, it's a formula for surrender, not peace. But under Donald Trump, he'll likely try and end the war much quicker, presumably by pressuring Ukraine into making concessions. I mean, these are two vastly different positions. Should Europe be worried about such extreme political uncertainty?
Look, this is a campaign. It's a political campaign. Kamala Harris knows as well as everybody else, okay? But she cannot say it because she's running for an election. She knows that it's going to be almost impossible to dislodge the Russians from that 20% of territory they occupy. The Russians have proven very good at building defensive fortifications, and it's going to be extremely difficult to push them out of those positions that they already control. Crimea perhaps might be an exception. It might be possible to isolate them there and dislodge them from Crimea, but it's going to be just about impossible right now. Everybody knows that. Kamala Harris cannot say that. But Trump has had the temerity to say it. Say, yeah, look, Ukraine is going to have to give up some land. So the idea is now whether Ukraine is going to have to give up some land, but whether Ukraine, when it gives up some land, also gets in return from the West the kinds of military and economic support that make it impossible for Russia in the future to try to attack it again. And so that Ukraine can emerge as a very strong kind of what we call a porcupine state, a state Look at Israel as an example. Okay, a state that is, even though it's smaller than Russia, will be so militarily capable and economically strong over time that Russia will be unable to try to conquer it.
We're running out of time, but I do want to finish on a quote from Trump. I believe I will be able to make a deal between Putin and Zelenskyy quite quickly. Just one word from you, Professor. Realistic or delusional?
No, I mean, again, this is a campaign. Each candidate will use these kinds of sweeping rhetorical statements. Of course, it's not going to be quick. It's not going to be quick, and Putin is not going to sit down quickly. And if he does, it's going to be play acting. Okay, yeah, of course, the Russians will say, yeah, we're ready to sit down and negotiate a reasonable, and the devil is in the details. So yeah, I don't expect miracles from either candidate. And I do expect, though, that either way, whoever becomes the president will have to deal with the very tough issues of sustaining Ukrainian independence and sustaining over the long haul a Ukrainian state that can effectively, with the help of its allies, deter Russia from future aggression. And that's the key here. We're out to contain Russia. We're out to keep Russia from depriving Ukraine of its independence. And we also long-term want a strong Ukrainian state that is part of the European Union and that contributes to our peace, our prosperity, and our common freedom.
Alberto Coll, always a pleasure. Professor at DePaul University College of Law, thank you again for your time.
You're quite welcome. Delighted.
And stay with us here on TVP World, because right after a short break, I'll be back right here filling in for Adam Yasser to host our new feature talk show On The Record. You will not want to miss this. But for now, that's World News Tonight. I'm Aaron Darman. Good night.